Let me maybe start after the talk from Tak, which I very much liked. Now everybody may be scared of China, but I can tell you or motivate a little bit now on this last presentation here. So we don't need to be fully scared of China. So I just a couple of stats. We have China has, I think, last year produced 20 unicorns. Europe has produced 17 unicorns, so we're not too far away. In Europe, we did this with 22 billion of investment. In China, with 60 billion or almost 70 billion. So it's not that China's much bigger in producing these papers and all these kind of things. So, but let's not give up. Let's try to build something here, and we can build something here. Another point, maybe data point. Tak mentioned SenseTime, which has been the most valuable AI company globally. Now we have a company from Europe, which is the most valuable AI company, called UiPath. And it's not just the most valuable AI company, coming from Romania in this case, but it's also the fastest growing software company ever. So we've never seen a company growing that fast in the enterprise software space. So coming from Europe, so there's hope. So I just wanted to, before I start with this one here, just to let you know that there's hope, and we see big potential also in AI. Although I must say, we always say as Earlybird, and we just say we don't invest in AI because you can't eat AI, you can't do anything with it. We also don't invest in blockchain. But if I look into our portfolio, we have 13, deep AI-based companies, which you really use AI for their product, for differentiate with their product. If you take it a little bit broadly, probably 15 to 20, which is almost a third of our actual portfolio. So we have quite some AI companies in our portfolio, but we don't talk too much about it because, again, you can't eat AI, and we rather look for business models. And this will also be part of the story here. What are we looking for in the end to make investments and hopefully find more UiPath. This is, by the way, one of our portfolio companies, which we're very happy about, you can imagine. And just the stats, so 5 years ago, the company launched the product. They are now at the run rate of almost 400 million ARR. They are just valued at 7 billion. So just before 6 months ago, they were valued at almost 3 billion. So it shows a little bit this kind of dynamic is possible in Europe. It's not impossible, it's doable. So we have a lot of AI in our portfolio. We see a lot of AI, basically, if we look into our deal flow, how we call it, so the investment opportunities we see. We have clearly 1/3, which claims at least having AI. If we would drill this down further in terms of which companies are we more deeper looking into, it's probably 100%. So in the end, no one comes through our door without saying, I have AI or blockchain something. This is just something everybody has. That's why it's confusing. It's you don't know exactly what it is because everybody claims I have AI and I have something very cool and which nobody else has. But obviously it's not the case. And for us, it's not so easy always to distinguish between what is real AI, what really makes sense, what really makes business models better, what really distinguishes in the end, what makes the customer experience better or whatever. So it's confusing. It's also always the question how you look into things, because things can look very, very different if you look at from which perspective you look at it. So some may really claim they have great AI. If you then talk to a professor, he says, by no means this is AI. This is far away. You can't even touch the word AI with what they are doing. So it's very, very different, and also in terms of what the use cases are. So that's why we also try to basically look a little bit deeper into this and try to make more sense and try to basically structure it a little bit. So in the beginning, and I'll go through this quite quickly. In the beginning, there was just the descriptive, basically, things. So this was the beginning, something obviously which was interesting at that point in time, but probably not anymore. So if somebody comes with this, probably not so interesting. The next thing is kind of the thing which is more in the terms of predictive. So what might happen? That's obviously more interesting. There's also many of the companies we have on our portfolio are exactly doing this. But this goes further, and you know this in terms of tell you what you need to do, in terms of really coming up with suggestion or even automate things in terms of automatically things are happening. And that's obviously, I wouldn't say that's the holy grail, that we will see probably a next step after this, but at least for now, I would say, well, this is obviously something we are more interested in, and if companies are approaching us and they, well, we have something in this direction, we per se find this interesting and like to talk to them and like to dig deeper, because that's obviously what we want. We don't want basically just a better, in terms of what might happen, prediction, but we want ideally, we want basically the algorithm take these decisions on its own. Well, self-driving obviously is going in this direction, but we all know it's not working as of now, at least not to mass adoption, but we are on the way to get there, and this is obviously what we also want to see with other applications, not just self-driving applications. We have basically we see two general differentiations. We see the one which is the horizontal approach and the vertical approach. Come to this later. And they are a little bit different. And so and this is the value chain you see here of AI. And we see many players basically being here and not covering just one part of the value chain, but some of them. Some even do all, but have a certain strengths in one of these sectors, and of basically elements of the value chain. I think that's clearly interesting. Some of these companies we are investors, some of we have seen, some we like very much. But so this is one way. The other is, and that's quite obvious, that's the more vertical approach in terms of becoming the best in one industry, basically, and applying the value chain, the AI value chain in one sector. And to make it not too exciting, in the end, for us, both cases can work. Both cases can create unicorns. Both cases can have a great impact. And because we've seen this in the past, there are examples of companies who basically got there, and we see more who can basically become relevant companies. The question now is, when is this something? When is there relevance? Just an example of what the companies do. For instance, Frogster, they do they apply AI for payment. So basically to detect fraud in payment. So just very focused. But it's a huge market. It's a global market. It's a huge market basically, with a tremendous impact. Basically, you can disrupt industries. You can disrupt part of the payment infrastructures. With this, we can disrupt part of the card schemes and so on. So it has a huge impact basically with just one application in a vertical. And there are many other examples of companies who can do the same. If I flip back to this one here, obviously, I haven't mentioned UiPath here. UiPath is probably more horizontal approach, can be applied to any industry, basically. Their claim is even that they say, well, everyone need a UI engine on the desktop. What they do is, maybe not everybody knows what they do. They do robotic process automation. So in the end, they take over repetitive tasks you're doing. And everybody does this every day. So they're taking over this. They check what you're doing, and then they take over these tasks. So in the end, their claim now is everybody needs it. So everybody should have this engine on the desktop. So there's some logic to this. And obviously, the more applications they have, the better they get. So this is one example of a more horizontal approach, where you can basically have usage for, as said, as their claim now, as where they want to go, to have everyone using their algorithms. What is very important, and this goes for both approaches, and I come to this when finishing, in terms of how do we distinguish between the two general approaches, vertical or horizontal. What is very important is the point of the lock-in. So, and the good thing is with AI, not in many cases or many applications you have good lock-in. You can create a lock-in, for instance, with network effects like Facebook. You don't. Everybody say, well, we want to leave Facebook, but nobody's doing this because you have these network effects, and they're very strong. With data, you can create the same. Because if you have trained your engines on data, you can basically create lock-in effects, because The companies being behind, they cannot do this because they obviously have to catch up. And since you're generating further more data and train your engine better over time, you become and stay ahead. So per se, with applying AI to somebody using AI, you can create these lock-in effects, which we as a VC like very much. So this is exactly what we're looking for. And we're not looking just for these lock-in effects in terms of people, and what do we mean with this? People not switching, so your customers not switching to the next customer. That's one. That's the we called backward looking lock-in effect, so that you don't not being designed out basically. But even more interesting is the forward-looking lock-in effect, and this you can achieve with data. What that means is that basically the next customer you approach, they have to take your product because they are so good in when they do the data generation and in what they have built, that they have to choose you because you have basically processed the most data and much more than your competitor did, and that's why you're the premier choice always. And this kind of forward-looking lock-in effect is amazing, and that applies for some of our companies here. For instance, I mentioned Frogster. In both cases, so in the vertical and in the horizontal. For UiPath, it's a given because they obviously learn with more tasks and they get more specific, even in verticals, so they can apply in all verticals because they're so broad. But also in the Frogster case, basically, they get much better over time. The more data, the more basically payment volume they process every day. So and then they can obviously you can't reach them at a certain point in time because they've processed so much data that they always give the better recommendations, or basically it's even automatic, so they do it on their own in terms of turning payments down or not. So they're already at this stage in terms of basically acting from not just recommending something, but also acting according to that. You can still fine tune and tweak this and set rules, but in the end they can run it and do it on their own. But this creates lock-in effects, and this forward-looking lock-in effect, which is very strong, and this is exactly what we would like to see in when making decisions and deciding on investments. And as you can see here, it's basically it's getting better over time. So, and you have this upward spiral, which is very, very attractive. The issue is a little bit here that you have this chicken and egg problem. So the question is, where does you have to basically build both? So in this circle, basically, obviously, the more data you have, the better you get. But how do you get more data? You need more customers. So, but how do you get more customers if you don't have enough data or process data? So this is exactly the issue which needs to be overcome, and that's a given. And there's no recipe basically to overcome this. There's some ways of getting there. I come to this in a minute, but that's an issue. But obviously, this is also the flip side is that it can be very strong once you're on this path. But it's obviously you have to get there. That's the biggest issue. So, in a nutshell, basically coming a little bit to the end of what we look at and what we do. In a nutshell, we like both. So this is here showing the horizontal and the vertical nut, part of the nut. What is it? What is important, basically, or what we would look at if we would see the horizontal or the vertical approach? I think you have to be really good and if you have the horizontal approach, basically, you have to cover all the parts of the value chain in a very basically intense and deep way. So you have to be really good across the entire value chain. You obviously have to be very close to research. That's important. You have to basically try to get a way to generate data in a certain way. So you need to basically get access to a data. You have to basically find an approach that gives you the data, even if you need to where you can share the data with others. So if you, for instance, work for one customer, many would require that the data stays in their host, even on-premise has to be done in many cases. You need to find ways of getting access to this data, and use this data, make use of this data, even if you're serving other customers. I think this is kind of the not holy grail, but this is really, really important, and that's an issue because many would say, well, we don't like this. But then you need to find other approaches. like federated machine learning or so on. So you need to basically come with ideas of still getting the essence of the data of the customer and make use of this, train your model with this, and just share the model information then with others, or with your engine basically to make it better. So I think these approaches are really important to, and you can overcome with this the issue of that customers don't want the data to leave their house, and because they claim it's their own data. Or you find models where basically new customers benefit from the data from other customers. We also have seen these kind of models where you basically can convince them to share all or parts of their data, because they have also they get benefit from the other competitors, suppliers, whatever data they can use, even if it's just parts of this. We have a company in our portfolio, Xane, they use both basically. They do exactly that and share this kind of data with combining AI and blockchain. It was two buzzwords combined, so it's very, very nice. So they're doing these kind of things. Yeah, probably you have read through this now here, but in the end, the essence is both approaches can work. We like both, basically. We don't have a preference for one or the other. It just matters that you can create this lock-in effects, basically, that you can show early on. Obviously, if you're far down the road and have all this, in an early stage you don't have this, but we still like early stage investments. And the question is how can you overcome this? But as said, there are ways to overcome this situation that you don't have the data and can share this data with what I've seen. And we would like to see this in an early stage, that you basically have at least ideas of how to overcome this and can show even in small batches or small data already some AI work in place. So if somebody comes to us and say, well, we have all this data, but we need even more data to make sense of the data, then obviously we have the question, why is this so? Why can't you get access to this data? Why can't you at least show us that the engine is somehow working? And we always want to see this engine working. We see in many cases, we see companies which claim they have AI, but if you look deeper, there's hardly anything. So there's a kind of rule-based system where the AI needs to be built. And we really try to also, and this is also an advice in terms of if you want this, you need to hire the right people, obviously, who have the DNA of really building this. And from the first day on, because you should basically design, obviously, your product from the first day on, according what the needs are, and according to basically really applying these AI algorithms from the first day on. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Yeah, we have a bit of time for questions, I guess,
okay.
To Christian. So let's start here in the front.
That was a great presentation. Do you in this sort of race for AI supremacy, there's a whole fight going on about who's going to have the best chips to run AI, who's going to have the best cloud services, who's going to have the best APIs as a service for vision, speech, sound, that sort of thing. Do you think Europe has a role to play in those levels of the sort of the AI stack?
Yeah, well, this is something where we see, well, it's always floating. So it goes with hardware and so on. But I think we see development. You basically we wouldn't invest in this type of thing because the next generation will come, and the next generation will be better in a couple of dimensions. So that's why I think we would probably be more reluctant in investing in something where you may have an edge now, but where you already know that the next generation is coming soon.
And do you think Europe, though, broadly can compete with the US and China in these areas?
Yeah, well, as I said in the beginning, I believe so. And we see, at least in our portfolio, we see more and more interesting tech companies up. We see this in the investments we look at. We look more intensely. We see this pretty broadly, and the stats show that these companies can be created here. Obviously, we don't have the support in terms of the financing compared to China, but obviously we do it somehow more efficiently here. Is it good or bad? No, it's not good. I would rather see much more money flowing into the system here. This is something which is known to everyone. It's a factor of 5 or 8 between the US and here. We need this. So this is clearly not positive, but we need to create more of these cases in terms of these role models or cases. I think when we see this happening, more and more money will also flow into the ecosystem.
Great. Do we have another question for Christian? That's the last chance.
Yes, Thomas Krause speaking. Would you invest into an endeavor of a general purpose intelligence already now, or would you wait a couple of years to do so?
Yeah, well, it's a very broad question. I would say it depends. As said, we would invest in horizontal approaches, but it really depends then, and it really depends how advanced is the technology, and is there really an edge on the technology side? It has to be, otherwise you have no chance with a horizontal approach.
All right. Final question. There's one.
Thank you very much for the talk. How has actually use of data affected you as a VC in your daily operations, whether that's in sourcing or in evaluating investments?
It's a very good question. We have actually made up our minds whether we can basically use more AI for pattern recognition or for detection of any signals in terms of could this become a good investment or not? Could this become profitable? We're actually indeed thinking about whether we should do more in this respect. Do more in this respect, or whether we should basically dig and build a model for that. We aren't there yet, but we have discussions going on basically of what, and we have there's some. Well, as mentioned, we have our rule-based system in that sense, but a little bit it is like this. Can we automate this? I'm sure we could. Could we totally automate this? I'm not sure as of now.